You looked at the school library, and the question was, how many books are there in Spanish? The average number of Spanish books per child was 1. The English books weren't much better, 3.5, 4 to 1. American Library Association recommends 15 to 1, all right? Wow, not only that, the library procedures were absolutely brutal. Children were restricted on the number of books they could take out, usually one a week, were given 10 minutes to select their book. Quite often, children got their book, sat down, started to read it. By the time the 10 minutes was over, they had read the book. So teachers, in order to prevent that, were heard saying, now sit down, but don't read. This is the library, don't read. I think you add all this up, the difference in print environment with school libraries, with home, it's simply phenomenal. Privileged children have far, far more books. Look at Jonathan Kozol, Savage Inequalities. If you're not depressed about education now, read that book. One of his conclusions, one of his results, he looked at children in the school in the North Bronx, affluent, 8,000 books for 825 children, 10 to 1. In the South Bronx, not affluent, underclass, 700 books in the school library for 1,300 children, an average of a half a book per child. Wow. So my idea for bilingual education, a radical idea, is what would happen if we gave these children books. Let's go through the 4 points again. Comprehensible input in English, best way to do it, reading. Subject matter in the primary language, a wonderful way to get it, reading. Best way to develop literacy in the first language, reading. The best way to continue first language development, reading. My prediction is, with bilingual programs, if we supply book floods in the primary language, we're not going to get them at the 50th percentile. They're going to be at the 60th, 70th, 80th, 90th. We're going to get the Lake Wobegon effect, where all children are above average, and the tests become meaningless. Another area which this needs to be applied, I think, is the area of second dialect. There is wide agreement that, I think everyone agrees, children need to acquire the standard and keep their own dialect. But the assumption has been that in order to acquire the standard, what you need to do first is exhortation. Tell children you should acquire the standard language, this is good for you, and then give them detailed descriptions of the first dialect and standard sort of drills and exercises, etc. An article supporting this was published in the Harvard Educational Review. This is Lisa Delpit, in which she says that she tried whole language with inner city children who spoke black dialect, and it didn't work. It didn't bring them closer to the kind of English competence in the standard demanded by the mainstream, and her only alternative was to go back to direct instruction and drills. When you look carefully, though, you see what her definition of whole language is. Writing, writing, and more writing. Of course it didn't work. It's output. It's good evidence that the output hypothesis is not correct. Never mentioned is reading. My hypothesis, when we get children reading, you can't help but acquire the standard. If I asked all of you, I won't, but if I asked all of you to write a composition now, 2,000 compositions, we traded papers, we'd have 2,000 good compositions. You'd write acceptably well because you can't help it. You've read too much. You go to someone's house, there are books all over the place. You would be amazed to see a sample of their writing with any serious problems in it. It simply doesn't happen. Children who read do fine on standardized tests. They literally have no choice. Let me now make one more technical point before coming to a dramatic conclusion. About reading. I'm not claiming that light reading is the entire answer. What I think light reading does is it provides the bridge from what Cummins calls conversational language to academic language. It's one of several bridges. Education in the first language is another, sheltered subject matter teaching is another. So I'm saying that it's not sufficient, but it brings you to the threshold, to the point where truly academic language is comprehensible. To give you a study showing this is true, this was done by Hayes and Ahrens in 1988. They looked at the frequency of rare words in various kinds of discourse. I'm going to give you some numbers to remember, all right? They looked at the number of rare words. Now, a rare word is one whose frequency is not in the most common 10,000. The number of rare words per 1,000 in adults talking to children, adults talking to adults, and TV, all of which oral language. The highest was 23 rare words. Now, keep that in mind. Remember the number 23. It's a prime number. It's easy to remember. Now, if we look at what we call supercalp, real academic language, these are abstracts of scientific papers. The average number of rare words per thousand is 128. So we got 23 here, and industrial strength calc over here is 128. How do we get from one to the other? Let me give you the numbers for other forms. Children's books, 31. We're beginning to move a little. Comic books, 53 and a half. Adult books, interestingly, 52.7. Popular magazines, 66. Newspapers, 68. So you can see that the kinds of reading people do for pleasure moves you from conversational language to academic language. Hayes and Ahrens come to this conclusion. They say that if you want lexical knowledge beyond the basic 5,000, you've got to read. It requires literacy and extensive reading across a broad range of subjects. Let me conclude with a little preview of what I'm going to present at Georgetown next week and another area of going beyond the original input hypothesis. My paper there will be called the pleasure hypothesis. And this is my observation. I think it must be more than coincidence that those activities that are good for language acquisition are typically perceived as pleasant. And those that are not good for language acquisition are very often perceived as unpleasant. For example, we know that classes in which students get comprehensible input, there's more continuation to higher levels. Children love to hear stories, so do grown-ups. Free voluntary reading is pleasant. Got a great study to share with you. How many of you read before you went to sleep last night? Boy, a lot of you didn't go to the party, huh? A lot of people. Well, you're in good company. A study by Victor Nell in a book called Lost in a Book explains why reading in bed is so addictive and so pleasant. They took people in his laboratory and asked people who were fanatic pleasure readers to come and bring a book that they were deeply involved with, that they were reading at the moment. 2/3 of the subjects brought Power of Ink. They then hooked them up with various devices to measure their galvanic skin response, their respiration rate, heartbeat, etc. And here's what they found. When subjects were in baseline, sitting with eyes closed, the arousal level was even. When they started reading, it went up. When they stopped reading, it went down, and went down below the original level. Get it? That shows how reading is so relaxing, and one of the ways reading is very pleasant. Victor Nell compares this to sex. I won't get into it. Okay. There's also good evidence that some of the things that are not good for language acquisition people regard as painful. If you look at the literature in foreign language especially, and you ask students what makes them anxious in class, again and again it's having to talk. It's speaking. It's very anxiety-provoking. It's been put in situations that the comprehensible input-output hypothesis keeps pushing you into. I am not claiming, watch out, that everything that's pleasant is good for you. I'm not saying that. But I am saying that in language acquisition, that if it's good for you, it's pleasant. In other words, no pain, no gain does not apply to language acquisition or literacy development. Thank you. Okay, I get a book? Okay. Devise another one.